Hello students, in this particular video lecture we will be studying about the various states a transaction go through from its beginning till while it is terminated. As we have just studied that a transaction is an atomic unit of work that is either completed entirely or not done at all. We have to make sure either the transaction is done successfully or it should not be done at all, otherwise it can lead to our database in an inconsistent state. For recovery purpose, it is always required that we keep a track of the various states of the transaction. We have a component known as recovery manager in our transaction processing systems which keep track through of all the operations that our transaction is going through while it is active. So this is the transaction transaction execution diagram. We have all these 5 states, starting from the active state, then the partially committed, failed, committed and terminated state. Active state, whenever we start with our transaction, we begin our transaction enters into the active state. In the active state, while in the active state, all the read-write operations are performed. When the read-write operations are performed, then it is decided whether we have to end the transaction or we need to abort the transaction. If the transaction is aborted, it enters the failed state, and after failure it enters the terminated state. If our transaction is successfully ended, right, we have no error, if it is not failed, if it is successfully ended, it will first enter the partially committed state. Due to some reasons, here also it can be aborted. But if after entering the partially committed state, if we commit our transaction, then it enters the committed state, from where it enters the terminated state. If you remember, when we used to insert the records in our table in the lab, suppose you have successfully inserted some records and it is written one row created, that case you are in partially committed state, right? If you have not executed the command commit there, next time when you used to enter the lab, it might happen that your records are not saved. It means the transaction that you have performed, the records that you have inserted, they have aborted even after being partially committed. It means the whole insertion that you have done, it has entered into the failed state. So it is always mandatory to execute the commit query, to execute the commit the transaction, so that to ensure that all the changes that you have made to your database, they are successfully done. So let's go through this. Begin transaction, it marks the beginning of the transaction. Read or write means these specify all the read or write operations that you are performing on your database. End transaction specifies that read and write operations have ended, but now we have to check, do we need to perform these changes permanently to our database, or we need to violate our transaction, we need to abort our transaction. Commit transaction means that our transaction has successfully executed and all the changes are committed to the database. Rollback, our transaction enters into the rollback or the abort state or the failed state when the transaction is unsuccessful and it has failed. The terminated state means that the transaction is now leaving the system. Leaving the system means all the temporary tables or temporary variables that we have maintained while the transaction was in the system, we can now remove all those temporary data or temporary system tables or system log. We can now remove it, we can now delete it once our transaction enters into the termination state. The failed transactions, the aborted transactions, we can restart again. So these are the various transaction states through which a transaction go through while it is being started. Thank you.